After saving for 7 years, I finally bought my dream home. Then my parents tried to secretly move my sister's family in. When I refused, they called me selfish. So I cut them off. Now they are begging me to forgive them, but I'm done. I, 29M, spent 7 years living in a cramped studio apartment, eating ramen noodles for dinner, and working 60-hour weeks just to save enough for a down payment. Every dollar mattered. Every sacrifice counted. When I finally held those house keys in my hands last month, I thought I'd reached the finish line of the hardest race of my life. I was wrong. The house wasn't much by most standards, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. After years of hearing my parents constantly praise my sister's family while barely acknowledging my achievements, I finally had something that proved my worth. Something they couldn't dismiss or overshadow. The first red flag came during the housewarming party. My parents arrived with my sister, her husband, and their 2 kids in tow. While I was giving tours, I noticed my mother taking detailed mental notes of every room, every closet, every corner. She asked specific questions about the basement, the garage space, and whether the guest rooms had adequate storage. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive. My sister spent most of the evening complaining about their current rental situation. The landlord was raising their rent again. The neighborhood was getting rough, and they desperately needed more space for the kids. She painted a picture of financial struggle that tugged at everyone's heartstrings. Meanwhile, her husband remained silent, occasionally nodding along but never contributing to the conversation. 3 days later, my mother called with what she described as a wonderful solution to everyone's problems. She explained how my sister's family could move into my guest rooms temporarily while they got back on their feet. It would only be for a few months, she assured me, and they would help with utilities and groceries. The way she presented it made it sound like I'd be selfish not to agree. I told her I needed time to think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole situation felt orchestrated. The timing was too convenient, the presentation too polished. I decided to do some digging. What I discovered made my blood boil. Through a mutual friend who worked at the same company as my brother-in-law, I learned that he'd received a significant promotion 3 months ago. His salary had nearly doubled. They weren't struggling financially. They were looking for a way to save money while house hunting in an expensive neighborhood. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I checked my home security system and saw footage from the day before the housewarming party. My parents had a key that I'd given them for emergencies. The footage showed them letting themselves in with my sister and her husband, spending over an hour walking through every room, measuring spaces, and discussing furniture arrangements. They'd been planning this before I'd even had my first night in the house. I confronted my mother the next morning. She tried to deflect, claiming they were just being helpful and thinking ahead. When I mentioned the promotion and their actual financial situation, her tone shifted completely. She accused me of being paranoid and ungrateful, reminding me of all the sacrifices they'd made raising me. Then came the guilt trip I'd heard countless times before. My sister had given them grandchildren. My sister had stayed close to home. My sister needed family support during difficult times. I was the successful one with no responsibilities, so why couldn't I help? I told her no, firmly, and finally, the response was swift and brutal. Within hours, I received calls from aunts, uncles, and family friends, all expressing disappointment in my selfishness. My sister sent a long text message about how I was abandoning family when they needed me most. My father, who rarely got involved in family drama, left a voicemail calling me heartless. But I held my ground. The real revelation came 2 weeks later when my neighbor mentioned seeing people with measuring tapes and notebooks walking around my backyard. When I checked my security footage, I found evidence that my parents had been giving my sister's family regular tours of my property, including areas I'd specifically asked them not to access. They'd been treating my home like it was already theirs. That's when I changed the locks and revoked their emergency key access. The fallout was immediate. My mother showed up at my workplace, crying and demanding to know why I was being so cruel. She claimed they'd only been trying to help everyone involved and couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of nothing. I explained that this wasn't about helping. It was about respect. They'd violated my trust, invaded my privacy, and tried to manipulate me into a living situation I'd never agreed to. Most importantly, they'd done it all behind my back while pretending to support my achievement. She left angry, muttering about how success had changed me. The next phase of their campaign involved my extended family. Suddenly, every family gathering became an intervention. Cousins who barely spoke to me were calling to express concern about my attitude. My grandmother, who I'd always been close to, suggested I was being influenced by bad friends who didn't understand family values. The pressure was relentless, but it also revealed something important. For years, I'd been the family member who gave in, who compromised, who prioritized peace over principles. They'd counted on that pattern continuing. But something had shifted when I bought that house. Maybe it was the confidence that came with achieving a major goal independently, or maybe it was finally seeing clearly how one-sided our family dynamics had always been. Update 1. 3 months have passed since I cut contact with my parents and sister. The silence was initially peaceful, but last week everything escalated dramatically. My sister's rental lease expired, and apparently, they'd been so confident about moving into my place that they hadn't secured alternative housing. According to my cousin, who still talks to me despite family pressure, they're now staying in my parents' basement with 2 young children. The cramped conditions have created exactly the kind of stress and conflict you'd expect. My brother-in-law is apparently frustrated about the failed plan and has been questioning why they didn't have a backup option. The kids are acting out due to the disrupted living situation. My parents are dealing with noise, mess, and the reality of housing a family of 4 in their small space. Yesterday, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. She was crying, apologizing, and begging me to reconsider. She admitted they'd handled everything wrong and promised it would never happen again. She said my sister's marriage was under strain, the kids were struggling in school, and everyone was miserable. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk things through. I almost said yes. The guilt was overwhelming, and hearing her genuine distress triggered every instinct I developed over the years to fix family problems. But then I remembered the security footage, the secret planning, the manipulation campaign, the complete lack of respect for my boundaries and autonomy. I told her I needed more time. Update 2. The coffee meeting happened, but not the way my mother had planned. She arrived with my sister, despite my specifically saying I wanted to talk to her alone. They'd clearly rehearsed their approach, taking turns explaining how sorry they were and how much they'd learned from the experience. My sister cried while describing how difficult the past few months had been. She talked about the kids asking why they couldn't live in Uncle's big house, about her husband's growing resentment, about feeling like a failure as a mother and provider. My mother focused on family unity and healing. She painted a picture of how wonderful things could be if we all just moved past this misunderstanding and focused on supporting each other. But neither of them addressed the core issue. They'd never actually respected my right to say no. When I pointed this out, their responses were telling. My sister immediately became defensive, claiming she'd never asked for anything unreasonable. My mother suggested I was holding grudges over minor miscommunications. They still didn't understand that the problem wasn't the request itself. It was the deception, manipulation, and complete disregard for my autonomy. I left the coffee shop more convinced than ever that I'd made the right decision. Update 3. 6 months later, the family situation has stabilized into a new normal that nobody particularly likes, but everyone has accepted. My sister's family found a rental house in a less expensive area. It's smaller than what they wanted and farther from my parents, but it's functional and within their actual budget. My brother-in-law has apparently become more involved in financial planning and decision-making, which has improved their relationship dynamics. My parents have stopped the pressure campaign, though I suspect it's more from exhaustion than genuine acceptance of my position. They've made a few attempts at casual contact, birthday cards, holiday texts, but nothing that requires a response. The extended family has mostly moved on to other drama, though I'm definitely persona non grata at large gatherings. Some cousins have reached out privately to express support, admitting they'd experienced similar boundary issues with my parents over the years. Last week, I received an unexpected validation of my decision. My neighbor mentioned that a few months ago, before I changed the locks, he'd seen my sister's husband measuring my driveway and discussing parking arrangements with someone on the phone. They'd been planning not just to move in, but to essentially take over the property. The scope of their presumption was even larger than I'd realized. I'm not angry anymore. The initial hurt and betrayal have faded into something more like disappointment. I'm disappointed that my family couldn't respect a simple boundary. I'm disappointed that they prioritized their convenience over my autonomy. Most of all, I'm disappointed that it took such a dramatic confrontation for me to realize how unbalanced our relationships had always been. But I'm not sorry I stood my ground. My house remains my sanctuary. I've hosted friends, dated without family interference, and made decisions based purely on what's best for me. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not managing other people's emotions or sacrificing my needs for family harmony. The price was higher than I expected, but the freedom has been worth every uncomfortable conversation and guilt trip. Some people might call me selfish for choosing my peace over family unity. But after years of being the one who always compromised, always accommodated, always put others first, I've learned that sometimes the most important person to take care of is yourself. My parents are still begging for forgiveness, but forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 different things. I can forgive their actions while still maintaining the boundaries they violated. I'm done being the family member who gives in just to keep the peace. Some relationships aren't worth preserving if they require you to sacrifice your self-respect. The dream house I saved 7 years to buy has become more than just a home. It's become a symbol of what's possible when you finally decide your needs matter too.